Don't you know about the bird? Everybody knows that the bird is the word.
Yeah, this is going to be built.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, no problem, man. If you need any old parts done, let me know. Okay.
Welcome back to Dark Blood Mechanical. Today we have ourselves another Pontiac because I just can't seem to get rid of these cars. It's a 1980 Firebird and we're going to be converting it from a stock Pontiac with an automatic transmission to a manual setup with an LS motor. We're going to really balance the budget on this build because I want to build a reliable turnkey setup for everyday use. The car arrived with no drivetrain but already had subframe connectors, traction bars, and a few other goodies. In this video, I'll be covering the fuel supply conversion as well as the full engine build. So first, let's drop the fuel tank. I already drained the tank of fuel and it's pretty simple to remove these tanks. They're held in by two steel straps, but there's some electrical wires that need to be disconnected as well as some fuel lines above before you drop the tank. I'm using a transmission jack to support and lower the tank. This will also second as my table for what work needs to be done next. If you don't have a transmission jack, you can use a regular jack or a second person to help drop the tank. Since we're here, this is a common tip I recommend anybody to do with this style tank or this style of vehicle. It's very common that these steel straps collect water or rub up against the tank and rust it out. So we usually just get a bicycle tire inner tube, cut it and sleeve it over the straps to protect the tank itself. The fuel conversion system we went with is a Tanks Inc. PA-5. This included a 340 liter per hour pump along with the brackets and hardware for installation. And to start this off, I used a 4 1/4 hole saw to cut open the hole. Prior to this, I washed out the inside of the tank with water to prevent any potential fires when I'm cutting through this. After cleaning up the gasket mounting surface with a wire brush and hammering out any warped sections, I measured the depth of the tank. The bracket supplied comes with some extra material for a universal fit. This is so that you can cut to depth the bracket to suit your application. I used aviation thread sealant for the fittings, but a good gas-proof Teflon tape would work just as well. One thing to note here is the kit comes with a return tube. It's best practice that this tube reaches the lowest part of the slush bucket. The goal of this bucket is to retain as much fluid as possible at all times during hard cornering. This is because when you're turning, the fuel tends to splash left and right in the fuel tank, and you basically want to keep the fuel pump submerged at all times. Installing this unit is a bit of a mission. The inner ring needs to slip inside the fuel tank, and you need to use the hardware supply to temporarily hold it up. The holes need to be lined up perfectly or you won't be able to thread the bolts in. Once complete, I washed down the whole tank, primed it, and I coated it with a rocker guard type paint. The next temporary thing I had to do was cut an opening in the trunk of the car. This is because all those fittings sit taller than the factory lines, so we'll deal with covering this up in the future. Now to the good stuff, the motor. Now I won't go into full detail on how to assemble in this video. If you'd like a more in-depth assembly tutorial, I already have a series up on YouTube. Feel free to click on the link above. The motor of choice here is a 6-liter LS. We will be using stock internals, however, since the motor will be seeing some levels of boost in the future, we'll address the weak points and prep the motor accordingly. For starters, I've already prepped the block and checked all tolerances for this build. I decided to use a BTR Stage 3 camshaft with a profile for boost. So it has 616 lift, 614 lift, and 114 LSA with a 230 and 235 duration. Although I've already checked clearances, I still wash components and dry them off prior to installation. This is because some parts collect dust, chemicals, and sometimes light surface rust if they sit around for too long. So it's good practice to ensure everything is spotless prior to building. For main and rod bearings, we're just using a set of Clevite's Tri-Metal P series. These are more than good enough for most applications. There are cases to use the more expensive coated bearings, however, sometimes those bearings fit a lot tighter and require line honing to the block, thereby increasing the overall cost of the build. The main cap fasteners I went with are ARP studs. Unfortunately, there's no option for bolts, so we had to bite the bullet on the cost of these. And what I'm doing here is I'm backing off the studs by about a quarter turn. If you bottom out studs, there's a potential that the stud will be offset enough that you won't be able to reach the correct torque specs without damaging the stud. Black automotive RTV is used to seal the side bolts to the block. This front plate is pretty important. It not only retains the camshaft, but it also seconds as an oil passage seal. So Loctite is used and a correct torque sequence is applied. I chose to upgrade the oil pump to a Melling 295 high pressure pump. Some LS engines, especially aluminum blocks with active fuel management, suffer from lifter ticks, and it's often related to oil pressure issues, and these are because of the clearances within the block. So this is a no-brainer upgrade in my opinion. What I'm doing here is I'm using a set of shims to center the outer rotor of the pump housing for installation.
Somebody's happy to see you, somebody misses you.
Since this motor will take boost in the future, we're going to use a decent set of rings from Hastings, and I'm gapping these to 28 thou. Since the stock rod bolts are torqued to yield, we went ahead and replaced them with a set of ARPs as well. The oil pan is a 302-1 Holley knockoff. Holley charges an arm and a leg for these retrofit oil pans, but there's a big market of other brands producing the exact same oil pan half the price with the same quality, and I have yet to find anybody who's had any issue with these. I also upgraded the lifters to LS7 style lifters from Summit Racing, which included new lifter trays. This is a cheap upgrade that will make a difference in the long run for performance. One thing I will caution with this is to only use lifter trays from a name brand like BTR, GM, Summit Racing, or some other well-known company. Now for the heads. They weren't bent or out of tolerance, so instead of resurfacing them, I used a thick table glass with some light grit sandpaper and some WD-40 to clean them up. To do this, I'm actually not letting the weight of the head rest on the sandpaper. I'm using my elbows as a pivot to remove some pressure off the head. I then just lightly circled the head to get an even cleanup on the surface. The valves and guides were in decent shape, enough for what this motor will see, so we'll just be lapping these, cleaning them up, and putting them back together. Due to the more aggressive cam profile, we'll be upgrading the valve springs to a set of BTR 630 lift springs. These come with a new set of retainers as well as valve seals. Bolting these heads down, we're using a set of standard multi-layered steel head gaskets with a set of air P-bolts. If this was an aluminum block, we would have to use the studs, so thankfully we're able to get away with the more affordable option here. I also went with some upgraded push rods. These are 3/8 thick and a bit overkill for our application, but we got them for a price we couldn't say no to. One upgrade I recommend for any LS application is a rocker arm upgrade. Factory rockers have a set of Preston needle bearings, and under higher spring pressures they can eventually walk out. So at the very least, an upgraded bushing kit with C-clip retainers is what we went with and is always worthwhile. Last but not least, because this is a Pontiac, we gotta do that Pontiac blue. And that concludes this episode. In the next video, we'll be building the transmission and installing the full unit into the car. So stay tuned and thanks for watching.
I don't want friends, I want Audis. Smoking on booth and it's my weed. I check the bitch like I'm Mari. Sorry, bitch, I don't say sorry.